The detention level of the Valari battle cruiser Dominance hummed with the low vibrations of containment fields. Commander Lyra Novak paced within her cell, her military boots wearing an invisible path into the polished obsidian floor. 3 days had passed since her capture during what should have been a routine diplomatic mission to the neutral zone. The war between humanity and the Valari Dominion had raged for almost 7 years. What began as a territorial dispute over a resource-rich planetary system had escalated into a blood feud that spanned dozens of star systems. Lyra represented humanity's latest attempt at negotiation, a mission that had clearly failed. A series of tones echoed through the corridor outside her cell, indicating a change in the guard rotation. Lyra straightened her torn uniform jacket out of habit, smoothing down the United Earth Alliance insignia on her sleeve. She'd survived worse situations, but this time felt different. The Valari rarely took prisoners, preferring to eliminate threats entirely. The barrier to her cell shimmered and vanished. 2 guards entered, their iridescent armor reflecting the dim lighting of the detention block. Between them stood a tall figure in an elaborate uniform adorned with badges that marked high military rank. "Leave us," the figure commanded, his voice deep and resonant. The guards hesitated, exchanged glances, then stepped back into the corridor. The barrier reactivated with a soft hum. Lyra studied the Valari officer before her. His skin was the color of burnished copper, with subtle ridges along his forehead and jawline that glowed with bioluminescent patterns. His eyes, 3 of them in a triangular formation, were the darkest green she had ever seen, like the depths of an earth forest at midnight. "Commander Novak," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "I did not expect to find you in our brig." Lyra frowned, studying his face more carefully. Recognition slowly dawned on her, impossible as it seemed. "Thalen," she whispered. The Valari commander's central eye narrowed slightly, the equivalent of a raised eyebrow among his species. "You remember me, then?" "Thalen Vex," Lyra said, the name bringing back memories of a time before the war. The distinguished graduate of the Interstellar Academy's Sinopolitical Studies program. We worked together on the Saturn Station Integration Project, and now we meet again as enemies, Thalen said, his voice carrying something like regret. "The universe has a strange sense of humor." Lyra crossed her arms. "I suppose you've come to interrogate me. Extract whatever information you think I might have about Earth's defenses." Thalen stepped closer. "If that were my intention, Commander, I would have sent subordinates with less personal connections." "Then why are you here?" "Because something doesn't add up." Thalen activated a small holographic projector on his wrist. An image appeared between them. Lyra's diplomatic vessel, exploding in a spectacular ball of fire. "Your ship was destroyed after you were taken. The official report states it was destroyed while attempting to deploy weapons against our fleet." Lyra's jaw tightened. "That's a lie. We came under a diplomatic banner. We were unarmed." "I know," Thalen said quietly. "I reviewed the sensor logs myself. There were no weapons on your vessel." "Then why?" "Someone wanted your mission to fail," Thalen said. "Someone on my side, perhaps on yours as well. The question is, who benefits from continued conflict?" Lyra sank onto the small bench in her cell. "This war has gone on too long. Both our people are exhausted. I was sent to deliver terms for a ceasefire that certain factions would find inconvenient." Thalen deactivated the hologram. "The military-industrial complex of the Valari Dominion has grown powerful during this conflict, as I imagine has Earth's." "You're suggesting a conspiracy?" Lyra asked, skepticism evident in her voice. "I'm suggesting we've both been played for fools." Thalen glanced toward the corridor. "I have exactly 6 minutes before the security protocols flag my extended presence here as suspicious. I need to know if I can trust you, Lyra Novak." The use of her first name, something she hadn't heard from a Valari in years, caught her off guard. "That depends on what you're planning, Commander Vex." "I plan to discover the truth," Thalon said. "And for that, I need someone who understands how humans think. I need you. You want to break me out of prison?" Lyra asked, incredulous. "I want to prevent more bloodshed," Thalon replied. "On both sides." Lyra studied him carefully, searching for deception in his alien features. They had worked together for nearly a year on Saturn Station, before war tore their peoples apart. She had respected him then, his intelligence, his integrity. But 7 years of war changed people. "If you're lying to me, then we both die," Thalon said simply. "The penalty for treason is the same in both our cultures." A moment of silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft hum of the containment field. "What's your plan?" Lyra finally asked. Thalon's mouth curved in what passed for a smile among his kind. "In approximately 6 hours, there will be a power fluctuation in the detention level. It will last 45 seconds, long enough for the barriers to fail, but not long enough to trigger emergency protocols. The fluctuation will be dismissed as routine maintenance. And after we escape, there's a scout vessel in Hangar Bay 3. It's scheduled for a routine patrol. The flight plan is already approved, a survey of the Arella Nebula, a convenient location, far from the front lines." Lyra noted. "Precisely." Thalon turned to leave. "When the power fluctuates, move quickly. Take the service corridor to your left. I'll meet you at Junction D7. As Thalon reached the barrier, Lyra called out, "Why are you doing this? Why risk everything?" Thalon paused, his back to her. "Do you remember what you told me on Saturn, the night before I left, about how our peoples could achieve more together than we ever could apart?" He glanced over his shoulder. "I never forgot those words. Perhaps it's time we proved them true." The barrier shimmered and disappeared, allowing Thalon to step through. As he left, Lyra felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. The next 6 hours passed with excruciating slowness. Lyra alternated between pacing her cell and sitting motionless, conserving her strength. She couldn't be certain Thalon wasn't setting her up. Perhaps this was an elaborate ruse to make her reveal information, or worse, to justify her execution while attempting escape. But when the lights flickered and the containment field sputtered out exactly as Thalon had predicted, Lyra didn't hesitate. She slipped into the corridor, turned left as instructed, and ran. The service passage was narrow and dimly lit. Lyra moved swiftly but cautiously, grateful for the stealth training that had been part of her military education. She reached Junction D7 without incident and pressed herself against the wall, listening. "You're punctual," Thalon's voice came from behind her. Lyra spun around, startled. "How did you?" "Secondary access corridor," Thalon explained, gesturing to a narrow passage barely visible in the shadowy lighting. "This way. We have approximately 12 minutes before they discover you're missing." Thalon led her through a labyrinth of maintenance tunnels and auxiliary corridors. Twice they had to hide as patrols passed. Once, Thalon used his command codes to bypass a security check. "They're going to fire on us," Lyra warned, watching the tactical display. "Not if we can reach the nebula first," Thalon said, plotting a course. "The radiation will mask our signature." The ship lurched as it accelerated to light speed, the stars stretching into streaks of light around them. Lyra felt the familiar sensation of her stomach dropping as the inertial dampeners struggled to compensate. When they stabilized, Lyra turned to Thalon. "You're now a traitor to your people, Commander." "Only if what we discover proves I'm wrong," Thalon replied. "I'm betting my life that I'm not." Lyra nodded slowly. "Then we'd better find some compelling evidence at this listening post." "Evidence enough to end this war," Thalon agreed, "or at least enough to know who's truly responsible for prolonging it." As their small vessel sped toward the nebula, Lyra found herself in the strangest position, trusting an alien she had been taught to hate, on a mission that could either save both their civilizations or condemn them as traitors forever. The stars streaked by outside, indifferent to their plight. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and perhaps even death. But for the first time in 7 years, Lyra Novik felt like she was fighting the right battle. The Orella Nebula spread before them like a vast cosmic tapestry, swirling clouds of purple and blue dust illuminated by the light of nascent stars. Thalen guided their scout vessel deeper into the nebula's embrace, where radiation and particulate matter would shield them from long-range sensors. The listening post should be approximately 3,000 kilometers ahead, Thalen said, adjusting their course, hidden within the denser regions of the nebula. Lyra studied the sensor readings with a frown. There's nothing on scanners. There wouldn't be, Thalen replied. The facility is designed to be invisible to conventional detection methods. We're looking for a gravitational anomaly, something too regular to be natural. They proceeded in silence for several minutes, both acutely aware that pursuit couldn't be far behind. The Dominants would have dispatched faster ships by now, ones better equipped for combat than their stolen scout vessel. There, Thalen pointed to a subtle distortion in the nebula's patterns. That's our target. As they approached, the true nature of the listening post became apparent. It wasn't a station in the traditional sense, but a series of interconnected platforms anchored to a small, dense asteroid. The entire structure was painted with radiation-absorbing materials that camouflaged it against the nebula's background. Impressive, Lyra admitted. No identifying marks. No transponder signal. If I didn't know what to look for, I'd miss it entirely. That's the idea, Thalen said, as he maneuvered toward a docking port. Now comes the tricky part, getting inside without setting off alarms. Thalen transmitted a series of codes, and to Lyra's surprise, the docking clamps extended to secure their vessel. Your command codes still work. Not exactly, Thalen said, powering down non-essential systems. I borrowed authentication protocols from a senior intelligence officer. They'll work once, but the system will flag the anomaly within minutes. Then we'd better move quickly, Lyra said, checking the small sidearm Thalen had provided her. The weight felt reassuring in her hand, though she hoped they wouldn't need to use force. They sealed their pressure suits and cycled through the airlock. The station's interior was dimly lit and eerily quiet. Most of its functions would be automated, requiring minimal crew. This way, Thalen whispered, leading her through a narrow corridor. The main data hub should be centrally located. They encountered no resistance as they moved deeper into the facility. Either it was minimally staffed, or the personnel were clustered elsewhere. Both possibilities made Lyra uneasy. This seems too easy, she murmured. I was thinking the same, Thalen replied. Stay alert. They reached a sealed door marked with symbols in the flowing script of the Valeri language. Thalen hesitated before the control panel. What's wrong? Lyra asked. This requires Echelon 5 clearance, he explained. Far above my rank. The borrowed codes won't work here. Lyra examined the door. Can we bypass it? Thalen's expression darkened, not without triggering security protocols. So we've come all this way for nothing. Frustration edged Lyra's voice. Not necessarily. Thalen studied the surrounding walls. There should be maintenance access points. The station needs regular servicing, especially with the nebula's radiation potentially causing equipment failures. They backtracked, searching the corridors until they found what they were looking for, a service hatch near the floor. Thalen removed the panel, revealing a cramped tunnel filled with conduits and cabling. It'll be tight, he warned. I've been in worse spots, Lyra replied, dropping to her hands and knees. They crawled through the maintenance tunnel, the confined space forcing them to move slowly and deliberately. Lyra led the way, with Thalen providing directions based on his knowledge of standard Valeri station architecture. After what felt like an eternity of crawling through dust-laden passages, they'd reached another access panel. Lyra carefully removed it and peered through. Beyond lay a large chamber filled with processing units and holographic displays. This was clearly the heart of the listening post. We're in luck, she whispered back to Thalen. No personnel visible. They emerged into the data hub, immediately struck by the scale of the operation. Dozens of terminals monitored communications across multiple star systems. Information flowed across displays in a constant stream. Military transmissions, diplomatic messages, even civilian communications. This is... Lyra trailed off, overwhelmed by the implications. Illegal under at least 6 interstellar accords that both our governments signed. Thalen finished for her, including the ones that predate the war. Thalen moved to a central terminal and began accessing files. His fingers moved swiftly over the interface, navigating through layers of security. "How are you doing that?" Lyra asked. "I thought you didn't have clearance." "I don't," Thalen replied without looking up. "But I know someone who does. Or rather, I know their access patterns." He glanced at her. "Before the war, I worked in counterintelligence. Old habits die hard." Information began to populate the screens around them. Classified reports, intercepted communications, operational directives. Lyra scanned the data, her military training helping her sort through the technical jargon. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to a particular file. "That's the communication from my diplomatic vessel, the one requesting safe passage for peace negotiations." Thalen opened the file. They watched in silence as the full message played, clearly indicating Earth's desire for a ceasefire and outlining the terms they were prepared to offer. "And here's the response," Thalen said, opening a related file. "From Valari High Command, agreeing to receive your delegation." "But that's not what happened," Lyra said. "We were fired upon as soon as we crossed into Valari space." "Because neither message reached its intended recipient," Thalen said grimly. He pulled up another file, this one heavily encrypted. After several tense minutes of work, the contents appeared before them. Order of intervention. Diplomatic vessel UEA Concordia. Objective. Prevent peace negotiations by any means necessary. Authorization. Directive 773 Alpha. Directive 773 Alpha. Lyra read. "What is that?" Thalen's expression had grown increasingly troubled. "It's a special operations classification, one that would require approval from the highest levels of government." He continued searching, pulling up more files. "Here's a similar order regarding a Valari peace envoy that was supposedly lost to an engine malfunction 3 months ago." Lyra felt cold anger building within her. Someone's been sabotaging peace efforts from both sides. "Not someone," Thalen corrected, displaying another document. "A consortium. Look at this." The document showed financial transactions between various corporations from both human and Valari space, weapons manufacturers, shipbuilding conglomerates, resource extraction companies, all profiting immensely from the continued conflict. "The Nexus Consortium," Lyra read from the header. "I've never heard of them." "You wouldn't have," Thalen said. "They operate through subsidiaries and shell companies, but the connections are clear. They've been financing politicians and military leaders on both sides, ensuring the war continues regardless of which faction is in power. All for profit," Lyra said, disgust evident in her voice. "Millions dead so they could line their pockets." "We need to download this evidence," Thalen said, inserting a data crystal into the terminal. "Get it to people we can trust on both sides." As the download began, a warning klaxon suddenly blared throughout the station. Red emergency lights bathed the chamber in an ominous glow. "They found us," Lyra said, drawing her weapon. "No," Thalen replied, checking the security feeds. "Worse. The Dominance has found the station. They're deploying boarding craft." Lyra watched as the massive Valari battle cruiser moved into position above the listening post, dispatch bays opening to release smaller vessels. "How much longer for the download?" she asked. Thalen checked the progress. 3 minutes, minimum." "We don't have 3 minutes," Lyra said, moving toward the door. "I'll try to slow them down." "You finished the download." "That's suicide, Commander," Thalen objected. "Do you have a better idea?" Before Thalen could respond, the entire station shuddered violently. Warning messages flashed across the displays as systems began to fail. What was that? Lyra demanded. Thalen checked the external sensors. Not the dominance, he said, surprise evident in his voice. It's a United Earth Alliance vessel. Heavy cruiser class. The Intrepid. Lyra identified from the silhouette on the screen. Captain Juno's ship. They must have been tracking me somehow. Now 2 opposing military forces converged on their position, neither aware of what Lyra and Thalen had discovered. If either side secured the station and its data, the truth would be buried forever. The download's complete, Thalen announced, removing the data crystal. But our exit strategy just got considerably more complicated. Another impact rocked the station, more violent than the first. Structural integrity warnings flashed across the terminals. They're firing on each other, Lyra realized, using the station as cover. And we're caught in the crossfire. Thalen accessed the station's communications array. I'm going to try something desperate. What are you doing? Broadcasting everything we found, Thalen said, his fingers flying over the controls. To both fleets simultaneously, unfiltered and unedited. They'll just jam the transmission, Lyra argued. Not if I route it through their own command channels, Thalen countered. Using the authentication codes this station already has, it will get through before they realize what's happening. The station rocked with another impact, more systems failing around them. A support beam crashed down nearby, narrowly missing them. We need to get back to our ship, Lyra urged. Almost done, Thalen said, finalizing the transmission. There, it's broadcasting now. They ran for the maintenance tunnel, diving in as another explosion tore through the data hub behind them. The crawlback was more desperate than before, with the station breaking apart around them. Twice they had to detour around collapsed sections. When they finally reached their scout vessel, alarms were blaring throughout the docking bay. Emergency bulkheads were beginning to close as the station tried to isolate hull breaches. Get us out of here, Lyra shouted as they scrambled aboard. Thalen took the controls, disengaging from the docking clamps. The scout ship pulled away just as the section they'd been attached to vented atmosphere into space. Outside, the battle raged between the Valari and human vessels, energy weapons lancing through the nebula's colorful dust. Their small scout ship was insignificant compared to the capital ships exchanging fire. They haven't noticed us yet, Thalen said, keeping their profile low and using the nebula's radiation for cover. But we won't stay hidden for long. Look, Lyra pointed to the tactical display. The firing stopped. Indeed, both capital ships had ceased their attack runs. Communications chatter spiked across multiple frequencies. They received the transmission, Thalen said, a note of hope in his voice. They're processing what we sent them. That won't make us any less of a target, Lyra cautioned. We're still fugitives. True, Thalen acknowledged. But now we have leverage. He opened a communication channel. Valari Battle Cruiser Dominance, United Earth Alliance Vessel Intrepid. This is Commander Thalen Vex, accompanied by Commander Lyra Novak. By now you've received our transmission detailing the Nexus Consortium's manipulation of our conflict. We possess the original data crystals confirming this conspiracy. Lyra leaned toward the communicator. If either vessel fires upon us or attempts capture, we've arranged for this evidence to be broadcast across all civilian channels in both our territories. The war ends today, one way or another. There was a long silence. Then 2 responses came almost simultaneously. Scout vessel, this is Captain Juno of the Intrepid. Stand down and prepare to be brought aboard. Commander Vex, this is Admiral Rexer. Your actions constitute high treason. Surrender immediately. Thalen and Lyra exchanged glances. Neither option was acceptable. There's a third choice, Thalen said, plotting a new course. The Kregan border, it's neutral territory. Neither of our governments would risk violating it. They'd send operatives after us, Lyra pointed out. Undoubtedly, Thalen agreed. But we'd have time to release the evidence to the right people. those who would act on it rather than bury it. Lyra considered their options: return to either side and face probable execution, or flee to neutral space and continue fighting from exile. The Cregan border it is, she decided. Thalon engaged the ships faster than light drive. The nebula seemed to stretch around them before they shot forward, leaving the capital ships behind. They'll pursue, Thalon said, checking their trajectory. Let them, Lyra replied with determination. We've lit the fuse. Even if they catch us now, they can't stop what's coming. For 7 years, their peoples had fought a war built on lies and manipulation. Corporations had profited while millions died. The truth would not bring back the dead, but it might prevent more bloodshed. As their small vessel streaked toward neutral space, Lyra looked at her unlikely ally. Phelan met her gaze, and a silent understanding passed between them. Whatever happened next, they had changed the course of history. 2 individuals from warring species had discovered more common ground than either had expected. Do you think it will work? Lyra asked quietly. Will they listen? Some will, Phelan replied. Some won't. But the truth has a way of persisting, even when people try to silence it. The stars streaked by outside their viewports, the same stars that shone on both their homeworlds. For the first time in years, those stars might witness peace rather than war. Where do we go from here? Lyra wondered aloud. Forward, Phelan said simply. Always forward. Their ship accelerated into the unknown, carrying with it the hope for a different future, one where humanity and the Veilari might someday stand together rather than apart. The journey would be dangerous, the outcome uncertain, but they had taken the first step. And sometimes that was enough.